Commander Lucas Hale had always known space would be full of surprises, but nothing could have prepared him for the mysterious world of Jalthor 9. The planet was like a living jungle, teeming with strange plant life and towering trees that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. It was an uncharted territory, far from the beaten paths of the human exploration fleet. For days, Lucas had been tasked with surveying the area, cataloging plant species, and ensuring there were no immediate threats to the Galactic Union's operations. He had expected a quiet mission, a routine checkup, nothing more. But as the days passed, the strange energy of Jalthor 9 began to feel like something was watching him. He would often catch glimpses of movement at the edge of his vision, but whenever he turned, there was nothing. It wasn't just the planet that felt alive, it was as if the very air was watching, waiting. The morning the encounter happened, Lucas was deep in the jungle, just a few clicks from his camp. He'd been following the trail of some unusual flora when a sudden rustling sound made him freeze in his tracks. His pulse quickened, and his senses went on high alert. The rustling grew louder, more frantic, and then, without warning, the bushes parted to reveal a creature unlike anything he had ever seen before. It was a giant beast, its body a mixture of sleek, leathery hide and spiny armor, with large, multi-segmented legs that allowed it to move with surprising agility. Its eyes, glowing a brilliant shade of gold, locked onto him instantly. For a moment, Lucas didn't know whether to stand his ground or run. The creature was massive, easily twice the size of a bear, but it wasn't charging toward him. Instead, it seemed to be limping, dragging itself slowly through the underbrush. Lucas instinctively crouched, reaching for his communicator, but something about the beast's presence halted him. He could sense it wasn't aggressive. Something was wrong with it. The creature's movements were slow, labored, as if it was injured. His heart softened at the sight of the creature's struggle. Against all his training, he took a cautious step forward, calling out in a calm, neutral voice, "Hey there. Are you okay?" The words felt ridiculous as they left his lips. He didn't even know if the creature could understand him. But he had to try. The beast turned its head toward him, and for a split second, Lucas thought he saw something like recognition in its eyes. The next thing he knew, it collapsed onto the ground with a heavy thud, its massive body shaking. A cloud of dust rose into the air as Lucas rushed to its side, unsure of what to do. The creature let out a low, almost mournful sound, and he noticed the blood pooling beneath it, thick and dark against the vibrant jungle floor. It was wounded badly, and Lucas knew that whatever had caused the injury had been violent. Still, he couldn't leave it to suffer. He pulled out his medical kit, prepared to treat the creature's injuries, even if it meant stepping further into the unknown. As he worked, carefully disinfecting and dressing the wounds, the beast's labored breaths began to slow. The creature seemed to relax as Lucas's touch remained gentle, almost as if it had been waiting for someone to care for it. Time seemed to slow in that moment, and Lucas felt a strange connection to the animal, something beyond understanding. But the real surprise came when the creature began to stir again. Just as he finished wrapping the last of the bandages, there was a faint rustling behind him. Lucas whipped around, hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm. What he saw, however, sent a shiver down his spine. Emerging from the underbrush, a group of small, scaled creatures, hatchlings, crawled toward him. Their eyes, like the beast's, were glowing a brilliant gold. They were fragile, delicate, and yet there was an undeniable strength in the way they moved, even at such a young age. As they approached, they didn't hesitate. They climbed onto the fallen creature's side, nuzzling against its injured body. For a moment, Lucas hesitated, unsure of what to do next. The hatchlings, though small, were unlike any young creatures he had ever encountered. They were instinctively drawn to him, their movements sharp and purposeful. The smallest of the hatchlings, perhaps the youngest, looked up at him, its golden eyes wide with something that resembled awe. Then, without warning, it stretched out a tiny limb toward him. The gesture was simple, almost innocent, yet it felt powerful. Lucas was speechless for a moment, not quite sure what was happening. But before he could process the situation, the other hatchlings followed suit. They gathered around him, all staring up at him with those same golden eyes. The connection between them was instantaneous, overwhelming. Suddenly, the wounded creature, the mother, let out a soft growl, and the hatchlings quickly scurried back to her side, though they never broke eye contact with Lucas. Their golden eyes, so full of intelligence and recognition, seemed to speak to him in ways words couldn't, as if they understood something he couldn't even begin to fathom. Confused, Lucas took a step back, trying to make sense of what was happening. It wasn't just that the hatchlings had crawled to him, it was the way they had recognized him. It felt like a bond, a connection deeper than anything he could have imagined. As he stood there trying to figure out the next move, the mother's deep, rumbling voice filled the air, though it was not with sound. It was in his mind. Her thoughts reached him, clear and calm. "You are the one. You are the protector." The words echoed in his mind, leaving him stunned. This was no ordinary encounter. The creatures, no, the beings before him, had recognized him as something more than a stranger. In that instant, Lucas knew that his mission on Jolthor 9 had taken a turn into the unknown. The future that lay ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain: the bond between him and these creatures was real, and it would change everything. Lucas sat in stunned silence as the strange voice of the alien mother reverberated in his mind. The words felt heavy, almost like a weight pressing down on his chest. "You are the one. You are the protector." It was a clear thought, but the implications of it were not. What did this alien creature mean? He'd only come to Jolthor 9 to complete a standard survey, but now he was part of something far bigger than he could have ever imagined. Slowly, he crouched next to the mother beast, trying to process the situation. The hatchlings, still small and fragile, curled up close to their mother, their eyes never leaving him. They seemed to watch him with a quiet intensity, waiting for him to understand what was happening. Lucas wasn't sure how much time passed as he sat there, trying to make sense of the situation. The forest around him seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with the strange energy of the planet. His training told him to maintain control, to remain calm and focused, but inside, he was anything but calm. The idea that these creatures, beasts of incredible size and power, had chosen him as their protector was overwhelming. How could he, a human, be their master? He had no answers, no understanding of why this was happening. But there was one thing that he could sense: the mother, Zira, as she had somehow communicated to him in his mind, was not hostile. She had allowed him to tend to her wounds, had accepted his presence without aggression. And the hatchlings, those tiny, powerful beings, had shown him a trust that was beyond anything he had ever experienced. As he pondered this, Zira, still resting but no longer weak, shifted her massive head towards him. Her golden eyes locked onto his, and once again, he felt that strange pull, as if their minds were touching. It wasn't something he could explain, it wasn't a voice he heard, but a feeling, a certainty, as if the world itself was whispering the answers to him. She didn't speak aloud, but Lucas understood her. "You are the protector of our kind. This is your path." The words were not demanding, not commanding, but simply matter-of-fact. They weren't a plea. It was a statement, and somehow Lucas knew he couldn't refuse. There was something in him, a deep, unspoken bond that tied him to the creatures. He didn't know where it came from, or how it happened, but it was there, like a part of him he had never known existed. Lucas took a deep breath, trying to steady his thoughts. "Protector of your kind?" He thought to himself, unsure of how he even felt about it. He had never been prepared for something like this, not in his training, not in any of his missions. But as the hatchlings slowly crawled toward him, their tiny bodies moving with a grace that belied their age, he couldn't ignore the connection between them. The smallest hatchling, its scales shimmering like gold under the dappled light of the jungle, nudged his hand with its soft head, as if seeking his attention. It was an innocent, trusting gesture, and in that moment, Lucas knew that the bond between him and these creatures was not only real, but it was growing stronger. Over the next few hours, Lucas remained by the mother and her young. He didn't know how to explain what was happening, but he couldn't leave them either. The forest around him seemed to grow quieter, as if the planet itself was waiting. Zira, though massive and powerful, was a gentle creature in the presence of her young, guiding them with soft nudges and protective gestures. She moved slowly, conserving her energy as the hatchlings played and explored the small clearing where they had taken refuge. The forest, though teeming with life, felt like a sanctuary now, a place where time slowed, where everything seemed to pause in reverence to the connection between the human and the alien beasts. Lucas took the opportunity to observe them, trying to understand what had just happened. The hatchlings, though young, were undeniably intelligent. Their movements were purposeful, their eyes sharp as they watched everything around them. As they interacted with their mother, Lucas could see that they had an innate understanding of their surroundings. They had already begun to test their strength and agility, making small, quick movements, as if learning how to survive in this world. He noticed how they instinctively knew to stay close to Exera, how they watched her every movement. But what truly fascinated him was how they kept returning to him, seeking him out with their bright, intelligent eyes, as if they were learning from him, too. Zira, though still recovering from her wounds, remained vigilant, her golden eyes scanning the jungle around them. Lucas knew that she, too, was aware of the potential dangers lurking just beyond the trees. He had no idea what kind of predators lived on Jalthor 9, but something told him that the peaceful moment they were sharing wouldn't last long. The jungle was full of life, but not all of it was friendly. Ase, the sun began to set. The air grew heavier, the sounds of the jungle shifting. There was an almost electric charge in the atmosphere, a sense of anticipation that Lucas couldn't ignore. He knew something was coming. He wasn't sure if it was the lingering presence of predators or the strange connection he had begun to feel with the creatures, but he felt like he was being watched. The hatchlings, sensing the shift, huddled closer to their mother, their movements becoming more cautious. Zira's eyes narrowed, her attention focused, her body tense. Lucas stood up, scanning the jungle, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon at his side, though he knew that it might not be enough if something bigger came. The bond with the creatures was powerful, but it didn't make him invincible. Still, he knew that he couldn't abandon them now. Whatever danger was coming, he had to be ready. He looked back at Zira, who met his gaze with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. There was no fear in her eyes, only a quiet understanding. It was as if she was telling him, "You are one of us now. We face this together." A strange, unspoken promise lingered in the air as the jungle grew still. The calm before the storm. Whatever happened next, Lucas knew his life had changed forever. The path ahead was uncertain, but the silent understanding between him, Zira, and the hatchlings was undeniable. They were bound by something far deeper than chance. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And somehow, Lucas knew he wasn't alone anymore. The evening air was thick with tension, the kind of stillness that only precedes a storm. Lucas could feel it deep in his bones. Something was coming. The jungle around them, once full of noise and life, had fallen unnervingly quiet. Even the usual chirps of the insects and the calls of distant birds had faded into an eerie silence. He glanced at Zira, whose massive body stood tall, her golden eyes scanning the shadows beyond their shelter. She seemed to sense it too. There was something dangerous lurking in the darkness. Her head was lowered slightly, her muscles tense, ready for a threat. The hatchlings, still small and agile, huddled close to her, sensing the change in the air as well. They were quiet, alert, and unusually still. Lucas didn't need to be told. He had learned to trust his instincts after years of training in hostile environments. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, and his hand moved to the blaster at his side, though he knew deep down that it might not be enough if whatever was coming was truly dangerous. His mind raced through possibilities. The jungle was home to a vast array of creatures, many of which could be hostile. But whatever was out there felt different, more calculated, more intent on tracking them down. As the moments dragged on, Lucas's senses heightened, and it wasn't long before he saw something move in the shadows at the edge of their clearing. It was quick, too quick for him to catch in full detail, but there was no mistaking the shape. A long, slender figure with sharp, angular features. It moved with a predatory grace, like a shadow, its movements precise and fluid. Lucas's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't imagining it. There was something out there. A low, rumbling growl echoed through the jungle, followed by the unmistakable sound of branches snapping. Lucas's grip tightened on his weapon, but his instincts screamed that it wouldn't be enough. This was no ordinary predator. He took a cautious step back, positioning himself between the hatchlings and the edge of the jungle. His thoughts were scattered, his mind racing through every possibility. Could they fight? Could they run? Would Exera be strong enough to protect them all? The growl grew louder, closer. Then, just as the air grew impossibly thick with suspense, a figure emerged from the undergrowth. It was massive, easily as large as Exera. Its body was covered in sleek, dark scales that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Its eyes glowed with a feral, predatory gleam, and sharp fangs were visible even in the low light. The creature had long, clawed limbs and a muscular body, built for speed and strength. But what struck Lucas the most was its posture. This creature wasn't just hunting, it was hunting them. There was a cold intelligence in its eyes, a hunger that felt deliberate and calculating. It wasn't just looking for food, it was looking for a fight. Lucas's mind spun into overdrive as he considered their options. Could they outrun it? Could they hide? But the creature seemed to know exactly where they were. It moved with purpose, its gaze locked on Exera and her hatchlings, its growl deepening into a low, threatening rumble. There were more rustling sounds coming from behind him now. Lucas could sense them more of the creatures, circling, surrounding them. Whatever these beasts were, they were a pack, and they operated with the precision of a military unit. Sierra let out a deep, reverberating growl of her own. She stood tall, her massive frame blocking the hatchlings from the approaching threat, but Lucas could see the tension in her stance. She wasn't backing down, but she wasn't charging either. She was waiting. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest as the predators slowly advanced, their eyes never leaving their prey. Then, in a sudden, fluid motion, the lead creature lunged forward, closing the gap between them in an instant. Its claws slashed through the air, aiming for Exera, but the mother was quicker. She sidestepped with surprising agility, her tail sweeping low and knocking the predator off balance. Lucas instinctively stepped forward, his weapon raised, but his hesitation was brief. The hatchlings, now growing bolder and more aware, moved closer to the battle, their golden eyes glowing brighter with an energy that seemed to come from deep within them. They were still young, but something in their instincts told them they had a role to play. The creatures, perhaps sensing the strange bond between Lucas and the hatchlings, hesitated for a moment. But that moment was all Exera needed. With a roar that shook the ground, she charged, her claws outstretched, and slammed into the lead predator with a powerful force. The impact sent it sprawling to the ground. The rest of the pack didn't wait for an invitation. They attacked in unison, their movements fast and coordinated, but Sarah was relentless. Her strength was formidable, but Lucas could see the fatigue starting to show in her movements. She was outnumbered, and every strike took a toll. The hatchlings, despite their size and youth, seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. They scurried toward the fight, their small bodies agile and quick. But Lucas wasn't sure if they were ready to take on creatures of this size. The battle raged on, each predator attacking with a brutal ferocity, but Exera's defensive movements were skilled and calculated. Still, Lucas knew they couldn't keep this up forever. His eyes darted around, searching for an escape route, for anything that might give them the upper hand. That's when he saw it, just at the edge of the clearing. There was a narrow path that led deeper into the jungle. It might be their only chance. "Zera!" he shouted, trying to get her attention. "We need to move, now." Zera paused for just a moment, her head turning toward him. Her golden eyes met his with an almost knowing expression. She understood. Without hesitation, she made a sharp turn, her massive tail sweeping across the attackers as she bolted toward the path. Lucas wasted no time. He ushered the hatchlings forward, urging them to move quickly. The pack of predators, now realizing their prey was escaping, let out a series of enraged growls. But it was too late. Zera and the hatchlings had already dashed down the path. With Lucas close behind, as they ran, Lucas's mind raced. What were these creatures? Why had they come after them? And how had they known they were here? The jungle around them seemed to close in as the sound of pursuit grew louder. The predators were not giving up easily. But one thing was clear, this was only the beginning. The hunt had started, and now Lucas was in the middle of it. He wasn't just protecting himself anymore. He was protecting Zira and her hatchlings, a responsibility he hadn't asked for but was now bound to. And with every step he took, he knew the stakes were rising. The jungle seemed to close in around them as Lucas ran, his breath coming in sharp gasps. Behind him, he could hear the relentless pursuit of the predators, their growls echoing through the trees, growing louder and more intense with every passing second. Zira moved with incredible speed, her massive form cutting through the dense underbrush with the ease of a creature perfectly adapted to this world. The hatchlings, though still small and young, had learned to keep up, darting between the trees and rocks with surprising agility. Lucas stayed close, trying to keep up with the rapid pace while constantly glancing over his shoulder. The predators were fast, but Zira was faster. At least for now. Lucas's mind raced as they sprinted deeper into the jungle. Every instinct told him to keep moving, to get as far away as possible from the creatures chasing them. But something gnawed at him. The predators were closing in fast, and the narrow path they were following was not a safe escape. It was just a temporary solution. They needed a plan, a way to stand their ground and fight back if necessary. He glanced at Zira, whose powerful form surged forward with unrelenting strength, and for the first time, Lucas realized how vulnerable they all were. Zira might be an incredible fighter, but even she couldn't fight an entire pack of these deadly creatures without tiring. And the hatchlings, he wasn't sure if they were ready for something like this. He had to buy them time, somehow. Suddenly, Zira veered sharply to the right, heading off the path and into a dense thicket of trees. Lucas followed her without hesitation, knowing that staying on the open path would only make them easier targets. As they moved through the thick foliage, the sound of their pursuers grew distant, but it wasn't enough. The predators were clever. They would track them down eventually. Lucas's mind spun, trying to come up with a solution, but time was running out. Then, without warning, a loud crash rang out behind them. Lucas spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. The ground beneath him shook as something massive tore through the trees. The lead predator, the one he had seen earlier, burst from the undergrowth, its eyes burning with fury. It was faster now, more determined. It let out a bone-chilling roar that made the ground tremble, and the other creatures followed, emerging from the trees like shadows, their eyes glowing in the dim light. There were more of them than Lucas had expected, too many to count, all circling, all closing in on them. The pack was relentless, and it was only a matter of time before they overwhelmed them. "Zira!" Lucas shouted, his voice strained with urgency. "We need to fight. We can't outrun them forever." Zira paused for just a moment, her golden eyes locking with his. There was no fear in her gaze, only the quiet strength of a creature who had survived countless battles. She nodded, and in that single movement, Lucas knew she understood. She was ready to fight. With a deep, earth-shaking roar, Zira launched herself at the nearest predator, her massive form a blur of motion. Her claws slashed through the air, striking with incredible force. The predator recoiled, but it quickly recovered, its glowing eyes fixed on her with a deadly intent. The rest of the pack followed suit, leaping at Zira with frightening speed. Lucas didn't hesitate. He pulled out his blaster, aiming carefully and firing at the predators that darted toward them. Each shot landed with precision, but there were so many of them. They were relentless, each attack coming faster than the last. One of the predators lunged at him, but Zira intercepted it, slamming her body into the creature and sending it crashing into a tree. The force of the impact left the predator stunned for a moment, but it wasn't enough to stop it for long. It growled and regrouped with the rest of the pack. Lucas's mind raced. The situation was spiraling out of control. They needed more firepower. They needed something that could turn the tide of the battle. He glanced around desperately, searching for anything that could help. That's when he spotted it just a few meters away. Half hidden behind a thicket of vines was a large rock formation. It looked stable enough. He had an idea, but it was risky. It was their only chance. "Zira!" Lucas shouted, trying to get her attention. "The rock! Over there?" We can use it. Sierra didn't question him. She gave a powerful shove to one of the predators attacking her, sending it flying to the side. With a deep growl, she sprinted toward the rock formation, the hatchlings close behind her, their tiny bodies moving swiftly between the trees. Lucas followed as best as he could, his pulse pounding in his ears. The predators were not far behind. He could hear their snarls growing louder with every step. When they reached the rock formation, Lucas quickly scanned it for a weak point. The structure was made of jagged rocks, and he could see a small overhang where he might be able to create a trap. His mind raced as he formulated a quick plan. There was no time for hesitation. If they didn't act now, they wouldn't get another chance. He gestured for Zira and the hatchlings to take cover behind the rocks, then turned his attention to the predators closing in on them. His hands were steady as he began to trigger a series of small explosives he had carried with him, a last resort, but their only hope of breaking the pack's attack. With a deep breath, Lucas set the explosives into place, making sure they were positioned perfectly along the edge of the rock formation. The predators were nearly on top of them now. The lead creature was the first to emerge from the trees, its glowing eyes fixed on Xira and her young. It snarled, its claws scraping against the ground as it advanced. Lucas had no choice now. He pressed the detonator and the world around him erupted in a deafening explosion. The force of the blast sent a shockwave through the jungle, the rocks crumbling and dislodging, falling like a massive wave onto the charging predators. Several of the creatures were caught in the rubble, their snarls and screeches echoing through the air. The rest of the pack hesitated, thrown into disarray by the sudden explosion. It was enough of a distraction to give Xra and the hatchlings the chance to break free, darting around the edge of the rocks as Lucas fired again to cover their retreat. But the battle was far from over. The pack was still alive, still hunting them. And Lucas knew that even though they had bought themselves a moment of time, the real test was only just beginning. With every breath, he could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He wasn't just fighting for his own survival anymore. He was fighting for the lives of these creatures, and the path forward was uncertain. The jungle around them was eerily quiet after the explosion, a stark contrast to the chaos that had just unfolded. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest as he crouched behind the rocky outcrop, his eyes scanning the forest for any sign of movement. The ground was littered with debris from the explosion, and the faint smoke still lingered in the air, creating an almost surreal haze that made the scene feel unreal. The predators had been thrown into disarray, but they were not gone. They were still out there, somewhere, nursing their wounds and waiting for the right moment to strike. The battle wasn't over. But for now, Lucas and the creatures had bought themselves some time. Zira, though still on edge, was unharmed. Her massive form was hidden behind the rocks, her golden eyes scanning the surroundings with a calculated, calm vigilance. She wasn't afraid, but she was far from complacent. The hatchlings, too, were huddled close to her, their small bodies trembling with fear but their eyes focused, alert. They understood the danger. They had survived the explosion and the chase, but they hadn't yet experienced the true wrath of the predators. Lucas could see how their instincts had already begun to sharpen. These were not helpless creatures. They were fighters, in their own way, and they were learning quickly. For a moment, Lucas allowed himself to breathe, his mind replaying the battle in a blur of movement and adrenaline. The plan had worked barely. The explosion had disrupted the pack's advance, scattering them for the moment, but he knew they couldn't rely on luck again. He needed to think of a permanent solution. The predators would return, and they would be angrier, more determined. Lucas couldn't keep running forever. He couldn't keep hiding. He was now a part of this world, and if he was to protect Xira and her hatchlings, he needed to take control. Turning to Xira, he spoke softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. "We can't keep doing this. We need to find a way to fight back or leave this place entirely." Xira's golden eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, there was silence between them. It wasn't the silence of uncertainty. It was the silence of understanding. Lucas had been prepared for a life of isolation on this planet, but now, standing here with the creatures, he realized he wasn't alone anymore. And that bond, however strange it seemed, was growing deeper with each passing hour. He wasn't just a human on a mission anymore. He was their protector. And whether he liked it or not, he was in this fight with them. The hatchlings, curious and cautious, stepped forward, their small forms weaving through the rocky shelter. Their movements were still tentative, but the bond between them and Lucas was unmistakable. They recognized him, not as a stranger, but as a part of their world. The smallest of the hatchlings, a bright golden one, moved up to him and nudged his leg with its head. Lucas crouched down, his fingers brushing its soft scales. It was an instinctive gesture, but one that felt more meaningful than anything he had done before. He had no idea what the future held, but for the first time, he felt a deep sense of responsibility toward these creatures. Suddenly, the ground trembled, and a low growl echoed through the air, sending a chill down Lucas's spine. The pack was coming. They had regrouped, and this time, they were more determined than ever. The sound of their footsteps was unmistakable, heavy, thunderous, and deliberate. They had found them again. "Get ready," Lucas muttered under his breath, his hand once more reaching for his blaster. He wasn't sure how much longer the weapon would hold up against the relentless pack, but it was all he had. Zira's eyes met his, and he saw the same resolve in her as she turned to face the oncoming threat. The hatchlings huddled close, their eyes wide with fear but also determination. They, too, understood the gravity of the situation. The first of the predators emerged from the trees, its massive form moving with a terrifying speed. The rest of the pack followed, surrounding them like a noose tightening around their necks. There were more of them this time, more than before. Lucas didn't waste time. He fired a shot, hitting one of the predators square in the chest, but it only slowed the creature for a moment. The pack advanced, faster now, angrier, and more prepared. The first predator lunged at Zira, who met it head-on with a mighty roar, her claws slashing through the air. The fight was on. Lucas fired again, his shots finding their marks, but it was becoming clear that they couldn't keep up this pace for long. Zira was an incredible fighter, but she couldn't take on so many alone. And the hatchlings were too young to be in the line of fire. The predators were ruthless, and each strike from them seemed to draw Zira closer to exhaustion. Desperation began to claw at Lucas's mind. He had no more tricks, no more resources to rely on. They were cornered, and the pack was closing in. The jungle around them had grown even more silent, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The predators advanced, but then, unexpectedly, Zira gave a sharp, commanding roar. Her massive form surged forward, shoving one of the predators aside, and as she did, the hatchlings followed. They didn't hesitate. They darted toward the pack with incredible speed, and as they moved, something extraordinary happened. The smallest hatchling, the golden one that had nudged Lucas earlier, let out a high-pitched, almost musical sound. It was a call. To Lucas's amazement. The other hatchlings responded in kind, and for a moment, the pack hesitated. The predators stopped in their tracks, their heads tilting slightly as if confused by the strange sound. It was then that Lucas understood the hatchlings were calling on something deeper, something primal that he had only begun to grasp. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were calling on the strength of their kind. Zira, seeing the opening, charged again, her roar shaking the jungle as she struck the nearest predator with a devastating blow. The pack faltered once again, and this time, they didn't recover. One by one, the predators were forced back, their snarls turning into fearful growls. The tide had turned. The last of the pack retreated into the jungle. Nursing their wounds, Lucas stood in stunned silence. His heart still pounded in his chest, but there was no immediate danger now. The hatchlings, once trembling with fear, now stood tall beside Zira. Their golden eyes, though still wide with the intensity of the battle, seemed to shine with newfound confidence. They had done it. Together, they had survived. For the first time since he had landed on Jalthor 9, Lucas allowed himself to exhale. The battle for survival had been won, but it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new. He wasn't just a visitor on this planet anymore. He was part of a family, bound by a silent, unspoken understanding. As he looked at Zira and the hatchlings, he knew one thing for certain: they had made it through the worst. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. The journey was far from over, but now they had each other. And that was all they needed to build a future on this strange, dangerous world.